Welcome everyone to the RealAtom Broker Podcast series, where you'll learn about the brokers on the RealAtom platform and the organizations they represent. My name is Delgado, account executive at RealAtom. RealAtom is the industry's #1 leading tech service, lending as a service technology platform, empowering real estate lenders, like banks, credit unions, and non-banking organizations to generate more CRE loans. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Gabriel Silverstein, Managing Director at SVN. Welcome and thank you for taking the time to present to us today. Knowing that you're the managing director at SVN, I'd like to, before we get to that, can you tell us kind of how you got to that point? Tell us a little bit about yourself. What got you into CRE, and how you ended up there?
All right. Well, I'll give you the Cliffs Notes version of that, because the story is probably a lot longer, but the abbreviated version I will give starts in Russia in 1993.
In Russia.
And there's a more circuitous kind of storyline, but ultimately I got into real estate. I went from investment banking into real estate early in my career, in part because I lived in Russia, worked in Russia in the early 90s, and effectively I ran a hardware store, which in 1993 didn't really exist in Moscow. It was the first of anything even remotely of its kind in post-communist Russia. And all of our clients were mostly American, but they were expats from various countries, mostly Western countries, who were buying properties that were suddenly people had owned. They had ownership title, vested title to land and buildings and apartments that had never been part of communism, because you don't get to own anything in communism, true communism. And so these Russians were suddenly selling property for what they thought was lots and lots of money to Westerners, many of whom, and they were, the standards there were very low. They were compared to what kind of higher end Western stuff was. And so every company in the world, the top companies, all wanted their people there. Deloitte and Touche had to have people there, and Goldman Sachs had to have people there, and the World Bank had to have people there. But the accommodations that you could get were not really up to what we would think of as good standards. And so these companies, in order to get their, convince their people and sometimes their families to move to Russia, had to pay any number somebody quoted them pretty much to rent something that actually was at the right kind of level of quality. And it was very hard to find. So everybody, all these guys I knew that were our clients, were buying these properties from Russians for absurdly low prices. And they were renovating them to I'll call it a Western standard. High-end Class A Western standard. And then they were turning around and leasing them to these very large multinational companies for the employees and their families to come to. And they were turning these around, and they were making all their money back in 3-4 months. It was incredible, the value they were creating. And so they were making money hand over fist, profit-wise. And that's a phenomenal payback on timing. And it was all because of the lack of transparency of information. Russians didn't know how much these things might be worth, and nobody else there knew how to renovate them the right way to the standards that the Westerners would want. And that fascinated me. And that theme continues even today in real estate, even though it has transformed, I think, in the almost 27 years now that I've been in this business. It is a far more transparent, far less opaque industry from an information point of view, but it is still very, even when you get all the information, you still need to know how to interpret it and use it. But what I was most fascinated by at the time was the fact that the information was very hard to come by. And therefore, if you knew the information, that was very, very powerful. People were making a lot of money on it. And I think even to this day, now just into 2022 as we record this, commercial real estate to me is probably, I would argue, still the single largest effectively unregulated asset class in the world. It's an asset class of tens of trillions of dollars in value. And while the participation of a few people, banks, insurance companies, has some level of regulation and oversight as to how their participation is, the majority of the industry is not regulated. It's not like the stock and bond market. It's not like even residential real estate, which is looked at a lot more closely because of the impact on individual consumers. And so here we have an industry, tens of trillions of dollars in value, relatively unregulated, can be good and can be bad in that way, but generally it's for the better. And it has the possibility for people to make many, many, many dollars, whether you value that in hundreds of thousands or millions or tens of millions or more. There's an almost unlimited earning potential for people in all sorts of different walks of this business. And it's that continues to fascinate me. And even though the original thesis that I got into this with, which was the lack of transparency of knowledge and the power of information, kind of has transformed in this industry with the information providers that are now out there. Nonetheless, that overall opportunity set for almost anyone, regardless of their background, that is based mostly on their work ethic and their intelligence and savvy, is really a fantastic place to be. I think it's exciting. So it's why I still love it. And like to, I still get up early, work late, 27 years later, because this is just a fantastic place to be.
I love it. And I love that the backstory. I started rushing.
Yeah, so I ran a hardware store in Russia. That's why I'm in real estate. It makes lots of sense, I know, but the dots do actually connect. And but I originally went into investment banking. I very quickly switched into the real estate side of investment banking. And interestingly, now that's still what I do. Our team, which is the capital markets team nationally for SVN, does really two primary things. One of those is investment sales for larger institutional sized deals, 10 million and up. And the other is debt financing, mortgage financing, sometimes, and also some equity, but primarily debt. And that is really still, that's a real estate investment banking. So 27 years later, ironically, I'm still kind of doing the same thing I started out when I first got out of the University of Notre Dame a lot of years ago.
Got it. Can you, going off of that, can you tell me a little bit more about the kind of deals you guys specialize in, like to work on?
On the debt side, I'll say we love, we do a lot of different kinds of debt, but we tend to work more on kind of one or two categories. One is more bridge loans probably than perm, although we love easy down, I call it down the middle of the fairway. Funny because I don't golf in a lot of years now, but down the middle of the fairway, simple, if you will, long-term perm loans are great. But we do a lot more bridge loans than perm. Okay. And we do a fair number of highly structured credit-based transactions, which are bond financings, credit-based financings, even hybrids of that, which are, a real investment banking geeky kind of product that excites me because it's really a level that most of this industry still doesn't deal with. And but again, it's a place we add a lot of value. And I think bridge loans is the reason we've done a lot more probably focus on bridge loans than perm loans. It gets again back to more of that value story, which is not to take away from either us or any of our competitors and colleagues who when we're doing perm loans, but they're less complicated. They're a lot easier. And to some degree, I look at it like that. We at some level, I'll say add less value, or we certainly add a different kind of value. I shouldn't say less. We add a different kind of value. I think the kind of value that a really good mortgage broker adds on bridge loans, transitional assets, is far more important and relevant than to borrowers, especially as markets continue to fluctuate over time, and the participants in that space ebb and flow a lot. So I think that's probably how we ended up doing a lot more bridge loans on average than perm.
Got it. Do you have some examples of those bridge loans, or any examples that you could share with us?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple. Here, you want me to? Let me share.
Yeah. That'd be great.
Share this with you. This was a highly structured credit loan. Let me skip. I'll just try to pick out 3 or 4 that I think are really interesting here. This deal, actually, here's 2 different deals. One's an office building, it's a headquarters building in Charlotte. The next one here is an industrial building for over 1.3 million square feet in Anderson, South Carolina. But both of these transactions were a structure that we do on a lot of build-to-suits, which is, again, someplace it's a place we specialize in some ways in, because build-to-suit, if it's done correctly, and I think a lot of people don't understand it well in this business, but the financing brokers don't always understand the real estate side of the transaction. The real estate brokers don't always understand the financing side, but really truly done correctly, a build-to-suit is absolutely equal parts of those 2. It's really important to understand both to do them well. These are 2 different transactions. This is for a company called Avid Exchange, which actually works with a lot of the REITs and a lot of other real estate companies in our space about bill payments and expense payments on construction and building operating. But that was their headquarters across from the music factory in a place in a section of town in Charlotte that was rapidly developing called Uptown. And then now they've actually built they have a second building now added to this. This was the original. And then this is a distribution building for a company called TTI, which is a very large portable kind of a battery powered power tools company, which owns almost every brand of portable power tools out there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Ryobi, Milwaukee Tools, that pretty much anything you find in Home Depot in the power tools section, they make it. They might all have different colors and different names on them, but it's all coming from these guys. It's a Hong Kong based company. This was to consolidate 3 of their area distribution function buildings into one large, and this is 33 acres under one roof. It's huge. It's over 1.3 million square feet. Again, a build-to-suit. Yeah, it's think about that. It's like putting an entire an entire field, the back field all under one roof. It's insane. But the process we went through on both of these is the same, and we do this with build-to-suits from $10 million up to a couple $100 million, and that is it's both a financing and an investment sale. And in these cases, both of these were done where we pre-sold the asset for the developer, but we also then financed 100% of the construction costs along the way in a creative way. And the benefit to the developer, and you'll see one of the comments I have in here, we call it our infinite IRR program. If you're a finance geek and you can think about the way IRR is calculated, you first cell in the calculation is the amount of dollars you put out. And then everything from there is, further dollars out or in until you get all your money back and you calculate your IRR. Technically, you can't calculate an IRR if you don't have to put money into a deal. You just make profit. And that's, in fact, what we ultimately structure for a lot of developers doing build-to-suits, where they don't put any of their own money in the deal. We finance 100% of it, and it's sold in advance to the end. So they don't have any risk, but it's sold at a profit. And the profit is not, that profit is not just based on what the cost is. That profit's based on the cap rate. It's based on the value of the lease. Here, we actually helped negotiate the lease structure with the developer, who had very little office experience. They were more industrial based. And we structured that and that lease to make sure that the value of the property was worth more later. And then we also financed all the construction for them. And it's interesting when you work for a developer and you get on a conference call with the tenant, and the developer says yes to everything the tenant asked for, and then I chime in and say, no, we're not going to do that. And I have to overrule my own developer because of considerations for the future value of the financing. And this is just one of a bunch of examples where we were privileged to work for several years with the developer putting this together, where they trusted us to help them with looking out for what the value in the future and the financeability was going to be, that they weren't thinking of as they otherwise wanted to say yes in the deal to the tenant. And as a result, they did much better. Now we do this, of course, we do this on the flip side. We represent tenants sometimes. And of course, we have the opposite team we're on the roster of the opposite team in the deal, but the same methodology works. We still have to be sensitive to the fact that you can't negotiate a deal that a developer can't finance or can't sell for a profit, because then they're not motivated. So we do a lot of those kind of deals. Next slide here is a company called CBS Rentals. This is it's actually a deal that we did a couple years ago, but I bring it up because it's become interestingly relevant today. This was a sale leaseback. So again, it's a combination financing deal, which is really from the tenant's point of view, it's a financing structure, but it's also a little bit of an investment sale deal. So it's it's a little bit of both. And the fact that our team does both, I think, is really helpful in these transactions, as opposed to one team of people that does real estate and one team of people that does finance, and they occasionally get together at the water cooler. If you look at the background in this, and I don't know if you see my cursor where I kind of circle this while I do this, but on the screen share, but if you look in the background, what you'll see is these guys rent to construction companies. They rent these big, tall, cherry pickers and scissor lifts and this huge these equipment pieces that are heavy industrial that have to be used when you're building buildings. And what's interesting is we did this transaction a couple of years ago as a sale leaseback of the whole portfolio of these assets for them to help finance their balance sheet, grow their company, privately held group. But it's relevant today because this is an asset class that back then people didn't even think of this as a new asset class or as a different asset class. It was just industrial. However, today we're starting to get a lot of recognition that this is itself a unique and interesting asset class. And it's one we're calling ISF, which is industrial service facilities. And it's generally got an FAR, or a building square footage as a percent of the site, of less than 0.2. So less than 20% of the site actually has a building on it. If you look at this, it's a huge yard, it's outdoor parking. And so we've done half a dozen of these transactions, even just in the last 3 to 4 months, with a lot of these ISF facilities around the country. We've done them in Minneapolis and Reno and Salt Lake and Denver and a number of other places, all in the last couple of months, just because this has become very, very popular from an investor point of view. It's an interesting challenge to finance because a lot of lenders haven't yet quite figured it out, because they still look back at the building and they don't understand that half the value is actually in the outdoor space. It's because these are big, ugly machines these people put out here. And nobody wants to live next to that stuff because it looks ugly. Right. So getting zoning for this is really hard. Helping lenders understand why they should lend on something like this then becomes kind of relevant. So, but again, we do both the sale and the financing of those. This was a portfolio of almost $200 million of VA build-to-suits we did. We usually sell these for the same developer when they're done. Here's a really unique one. And I talked about from a financing point of view, coming from an investment banking point of view. This was a property that a top 10 national healthcare developer was building on a ground lease in downtown Chicago, in Lincoln Park, actually, next to a hospital. They were building an ambulatory care center, medical office, some traditional office, and it was going to be multi-tenant, but most of the tenancy was the hospital owner from the building next door on a ground lease with that same hospital owner. It was $130 million project. Senior loan of about $67 million with an insurance company on a construction and perm loan. And this tenant came back halfway through construction and said, we want you to provide us another $23 million for extra TIs. And the developer goes, so the first discussion, of course, is with the senior lender, and the senior lender says, I don't want to pay for TIs. I don't want to pay for TIs because first of all, I really like my basis in your loan to begin with. I don't really need to make it higher. That's great. I'd love it if you put more money into the building. It's even better for my collateral, but I don't want to be the one to fund it. So that was the first lender's reaction. And partly because of the nature of this. This is literally tenant improvements. This is building lead and copper lined walls for imaging center. This is extra heavy floor reinforcement for the same, MRI machines and X-ray machines and things like that. It's build out. It's stuff that when that tenant's lease ends, if they don't renew, you might actually have to pay money to get it out of there. It doesn't have a value. And so this is a really unique problem. And we've done this a couple of times for different developers with good credit tenants, where we structured it was a bond structure. We structured a financing that ended up being able to be put into the lease document in a way that continued to make it part of the rent for the tenant. But it was $23 million that was to use for the tenant's discretion on these improvements, has no collateral. It's not even recorded as a loan.
Really? Okay.
Which of course the first lender loves, because there's no mezzanine loan now behind them that's recorded. They have no, recordation rights in a foreclosure situation. The tenant loved it because it built it into their lease and they just pay rent and they don't have to take a loan out themselves. The developer loved it because they didn't have to put any money into it. And it was financed at like a bond rate for the tenant. So we've done this a couple of times where we can structure this really, really kind of thread the needle in the capital stack with something that logically makes sense based on the tenant's credit, as opposed to the collateral itself, but is very complicated because most traditional financing sources don't know how to structure that and hold that kind of paper, because they ultimately still need to go back to, do I have a first lien on the building?
Right.
So that's a great example, I think, of the kind of stuff we do when we really get our thinking caps on and try to be fancy.
I like that one.
It was kind of fun. I think it's a great story. It really, really solved a problem for both a developer and a tenant.
Right.
And those to me are great deals because, again, like those build-to-suit examples, we usually work for one or the other, the tenant or the developer, but they both need to have a solution that works or the deal doesn't work. So finding the way to solve both of their problems at the same time is very literal win-win. So we love that.
I agree.
Here's a good example of a, I'll give you one last one here. This is a traditional, it's a student housing property. It's not a traditional multifamily. We both sold and financed this property. And the challenge with this was that it was at a Division III school that was about to become Division II, I think. They had less than 10,000 students, which was a really important number, both for the Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae type financings, as well as for buyers. We found some very unique buyers that had never owned student housing before.
Okay.
We got a financing, but we ahead of time, we knew we were going to have some challenges with that. It was a great property, best in the whole market, best in class property. But again, it doesn't quite check the boxes for most of the buyer pool or for the lender pool. And so what we did was we went and spent extra time ahead of time with a Fannie Mae underwriter relationship that we had on figuring out how to get Fannie Mae at a time when they really hated student housing because they were having default issues in student housing. Got them to say yes to a loan here, got them to underwrite and focus on the property even before we had a buyer. And in fact, we ended up with two different buyers. We had one buyer who lost their equity partner after they went hard on some money, and we had to substitute a second buyer in. We were able to keep the loan in place for both because we had supported it on the underwriting of the deal ahead of time and got Fannie Mae to approve that, so that when we substituted in the borrower, that was the secondary consideration. Usually that's where you start. Had a great underwriting partner on this deal. that helped us get through that really well. But ultimately, not only did that help get the loan done better, but frankly, it even helped us get the sale of the property for the seller, who had gone out with 2 other top 5 investment brokerage firms and failed to get it sold. And I think partly because of that same thing. So we solved the reverse engineered it sort of, we financed it first. We sold it second, even though you normally have to start with the sale.
Yeah. You guys did it the other way around.
The 2 feed on each other very well. And that's something, again, our team, I think, is a really uniquely positioned team to do, because we do both, as opposed to having a financing group over in that wing of the floor. And we have a sale group on this side of the hall. And occasionally they get together and, here it's, it's the same team that understands both sides of that coin. And it's a really unique setup in my experience in this business, but it's proven really valuable, I think, to a lot of clients.
Yeah, it sounds like sounds like a huge value add to bring to your clients for sure. Having the ability to be able to do both of those things for sure.
Yeah,
I like it. And Gabriel, as we wrap up, I do have one or two final questions. It doesn't have to be summary. You can summarize it, but do you remember the first deal you closed and how you felt?
First deal or first financing deal?
Whichever one.
I give you the first deal I ever closed. I think I was less than a year. I was only months into real estate. I was less than a year out of Notre Dame. Again, when investment banking switched to real estate, I was representing R.R. Donnelley on a very large office transaction, 100,000 plus square feet. And I was, this young, very inexperienced, and frankly, reasonably not very knowledgeable finance kid that I know on a team of pretty seasoned people, because they were, sizable deals. It was frankly in a down market era, coming out of a bad recession, and very senior people otherwise around the table, and then me. And we couldn't figure out how to get them in the building they wanted. They really wanted to be in this brand new, beautiful building. They were in this dumpy old class B minus building, and the square footage was different, and we couldn't figure it out. And we were sitting in a conference room we had just moved. I was with LaSalle Partners at the time. We just moved from LaSalle Street in Chicago to the what is now called the Aon building on the east side. And we had all these brand new offices. And in the middle of our floor, we had these conference rooms that had 10-foot high ceilings, but clear story windows across the top. So there's 2 feet of window around the top of the conference room, and then dark walls. So you couldn't see into what was happening in the room, but you could get natural light in. And I sat there with the architect. I was sitting there in this meeting watching this deal die. It was really kind of almost a post-mortem meeting with the developer, effectively saying, I don't know how I can make my rents any better. You can't move to my building. And the tenant was bummed. And frankly, my senior manager boss knew that the deal was dead. So he wasn't in the meeting. He was golfing, which was terrible. And I sat there and I literally sitting in this conference room, I looked up and I was looking at these windows. I'm like, that's kind of interesting. And 15,000 square feet of this 107,000 square foot deal was a library. It was R.R. Donnelley, the people that published the yellow pages and books and stuff. And so I said, wait a minute. And I had the architect give me the plans, and I'm looking at the basement level, the lower level of the building. I said, could you redesign your building so that the ground floor had these windows like this conference room for like 2 feet of window between right down near the ground, but that would put light down into the lower level. And the architect, first of all, she's a wonderful woman, because she didn't spit at me, but I know her first thought was, who is this 21-year-old finance idiot trying to tell me how to redo architecture on a building? But she, to her credit, she stepped back for a second. She said, yeah, actually, you know what, if we could do that, that would work. We could put the library down there and it'd be, really cheap space and it'd be great. And she looked at the building, so the building architect and the tenant architect looked at each other and they said, yeah, we could do that. We could change our building. I don't think we'd add much cost to the building. I looked at the developer. I said, hey, Randy, what if we did this? Would you give us the space in the basement kind of for free? This is a guy, he's a great deal maker. Like all he wants to do is make deals as a developer. Yeah. And he said, I'll give it to you. You pay the CAM, you can have the space for free. And the deal was done. An hour later, we went from a post-mortem to a signed letter of intent. It was 107,000 square feet, which, as my first deal is an insanely big deal to get to do. It was a 10-year tenant rep deal. Yeah. And my boss got back from his golfing and was, to a rather pleasant surprise that he didn't expect. So it was just simply, it's what I try to encourage in a lot of people in this business. There's a lot of things I do, including mortgage brokerage in this business, that I did not come up through the traditional ways in this business. I didn't work on a mortgage brokerage team and learn how to do it the way they told me how to do it. A lot of the deals that I've done and that my team have done are things where they got done because we didn't do them the way we usually do them. We just thought of other ways to do it. We tried to find a solution as opposed to trying to take what we know how to do and make it work. We went backwards and figured out how a solution could happen. And then again, reverse engineer is a phrase I love, but reverse engineered how to make the deal then work by doing it. And I think that's something that's fun to me. That's why I get excited still doing this 27 years later. And hopefully a lot more to come. So that's my first ever deal story.
That's an awesome story. And I'm sure you have many more stories to get to create. So with Gabriel, where can people find you if they want to reach out to you or your team? What's the easiest way to get in touch?
I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn. I don't do social media other than LinkedIn, but I'm on LinkedIn. Our website, SVN Angelic, ANGELIC. SVNangelic.com, or even just the SVN.com website is easy to find, and or through SIOR, which is a great organization I've been a part of for a lot of years. I've been privileged to be on the board of directors for the last couple of years there, and the SIOR website will find me quickly too, and those are easy ways to find me.
Got it. Okay. Well, look, thank you very much, Gabriel, for being on the show today. If the viewers watching is listening to this, if you're interested in speaking with Gabriel, please, don't hesitate to contact him directly, or go to the website, check it out. If you want to talk to me between episodes, feel free to send me an email at luis@realatom.com or realatom.com. If you're interested in learning more about it, or being on the Broker Podcast series, you can visit our website. See everyone on the next episode. And again, I appreciate your time, Gabriel, and you sharing your stories and about your first deal being closed and how you got to SVN from Russia all the way to SVN.
Yes, from Russia with love.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.